Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Bulletproof for BJJ podcast. And we are on number 2.
Officially the second podcast ever.
Yeah, I'm feeling really good about this and excited to share the informations. So today we will be talking about problems in BJJ problems and how we fix them. So I think possibly the most common problems are tight hip flexors, sore lower backs as a result, rounded posture, all the kind of guard pulling, wrestling, hunch posture, and then sore elbows and sore knees.
Yep, I'd say that sort of hits the key areas that jiu-jitsu folks complain of.
Definitely. And, you know, I feel this all the time. I mean, I've been, grappling, training 13 years, and this is the continual work in progress, is trying to make sure that we can kind of undo the ills that jiu-jitsu does to us. I think first cab off the rank, let's talk about how do we fix tight hip flexors, because we're always playing guard, we're always getting in tight, awkward spots, getting our knees jammed into our ribs. How do we solve this problem?
Well, maybe just before we rip into that, I was thinking it could be cool to explain to folks why this shit happens and what's actually happening in the body when you're reinforcing these positions and how that sort of carries over to you being stuck in this position.
Yes.
In a real simple way, right, for folks, your body is really good at adapting to whatever position you spend the most amount of time in. So if you sit down all the time, your body starts to take on the shape of someone that's sitting all the time. If you play a lot of jiu-jitsu, you start to take on that shape. And you can see this amongst athletes. Jiu-jitsu people look like jiu-jitsu people,
yes,
right? That's why we all have this kind of similar posture, kind of hey sort of thing, because we're all rounded and
you can
flexed
see it a mile away.
Yeah, but then like you see a surfer, and they're always like surfers always like chest out, shoulders are back, very upright in the upper spine, and so that goes on obviously for sports and people job descriptions and whatever. The issue is that when the position that's being enforced is not a good one.
Yep.
When I say not a good one, I suppose one that is creating large amounts of imbalance in your body, then you start to get other issues that flow off as a result of this. And what we're talking about in addressing these key areas is really trying to restore some balance so that you're not suffering from these things down the track.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're not aware of it, you only got to look at your counterparts at training. Look at the fucking brown and black belts. They usually look like shit, right? Like
yeah.
posturally and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I guess you admire a person's jiu-jitsu, but you think, oh, do I want to be like that off the mat? Maybe not. And I think that's a big deal, because we fall in love with jiu-jitsu. We find this thing is so great. We want to do it all the time, but there is a hidden cost. And that hidden cost is wear and tear on your body. And so the secret subtext or the fine print you don't read is we're going to have to do some maintenance if we don't want to be crippled old people by the time we're 25.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think we have to spend some time, because what I see a lot of is jiu-jitsu people are like, right, I've got to just do the moves that are going to make me better for jiu-jitsu. So they spend a lot of time when they're not doing jiu-jitsu, whether they're trying to replicate jiu-jitsu movements with weights or whatever it might be, just reinforcing those things which are leading them towards injury. Even though at that point in time, it feels fine. Like people are like, oh, I'm good for now, a bit achy. But then at a critical point, injury occurs and you're all good until you're not. And that's because people are just spending time reinforcing, in some ways, what we would say bad habits, because it's leading them to injury.
Yes.
So
a simple kind of explanation, I guess, of that is like, say you train jiu-jitsu 4 times a week and you play heaps of guard. You're a solid guard arrow, and that's your thing. You have already a lot of tension in your hip flexors, and we're getting to the hip flexors. Hip flexors get really tight, overdeveloped, which is great, right? Helps you to play guard. But let's say you go to the gym a few days a week and you're like, man, I want to get stronger for jiu-jitsu. So you start doing all of these exercises that make your hip flexors even stronger. What's happening there is that the whole time you're developing your hip flexors, your glutes are not being developed. That's the muscles on the opposite side of the joint, on the back of the hip. And all you're doing is just sort of turbocharging the rate at which you're digging this hole into imbalance. So the way we're talking about it is like, all right, we've got to acknowledge that you're going to be developing really strong, solid hip flexors in your jiu-jitsu. Why not use your time in the gym to start to develop the glutes, the other side of the hip, so that you have more balance to the body, so that you experience less back pain.
Yes.
You experience better general posture. You know, you're not fucking sore every time you wake up. You know, there's a whole list of things, but that's really, it's like, no, you don't have to do more of the thing you're already doing.
Yes.
Let's do some of the shit you're not doing.
That's right. Yeah. And I think we've probably all had this experience where we've gone to jiu-jitsu, we've trained really hard, we're full of adrenaline, we feel elastic and gymnastic and fantastic. We go sit in the car. We're in the car, we drive half an hour, 45 minutes, the adrenaline wears off. You go to get out the car and you're like, oh, what have I done?
Yeah.
And then it's just because you didn't take the time, and then what you've done is you've cooled down in a flexed position. Like sitting in a car is possibly the worst thing. And I've experienced this just coming off the mats from training for 2.5 hours, teaching as well, and then driving for an hour. And just the sitting in the driving is the like really bad thing. But that's because a lot of these things are things that are occurring in our day-to-day lives. And if we don't put at least, 10% of our time into evening ourselves out, balancing ourselves out, we are eventually going to get injuries.
Yeah. So,
I mean, in terms of addressing hip flexor tightness, what is when you're looking at that, Joey, what are you thinking?
The first thing I think for people, like if I'm working with a jiu-jitsu person and it's like, all right, let's take a look at where you're at and let's address this thing. You always know that the hip flexors are going to be tight.
Yes.
Because the guard involves, like you said before, pulling the knee in towards the torso,
Yep.
which is hip flexion, right? And that just means you're constantly activating the hip flexors. Now, the first thing I think is important is to show someone how tight they are.
Yes.
Right? Is to bring that awareness. So the wall lunge, which if you do the program, you know this stretch, we use it all throughout the program, but super couch stretch, wall lunge, same kind of deal. Get them into this position against the wall.
Yes.
Show them kind of like an ideal sort of baseline and say, all right, now you try. And then someone gives it a go and they can't get into the position. Struggle, right? Fuck, it hurts. Their body's contorted, pain face, all that. And it's like, okay, so now you see that part of your body is really super tight. And that's going to be, and then I give a little explanation about how it's going to cause some back issues and blah, blah, blah. Then I start stretching the fucking thing.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
Right? Like, what's your approach?
Oh, no, our approach is the same. I think we essentially think exactly the same thing, just probably articulated differently. But I would say exactly the same thing. And what I think is super powerful is when you couple the like stretching and mobility work with strengthening work. Like that isn't just a double effect. It's a triple and quadruple effect in terms of when you strengthen an inactive muscle or an underactive muscle, and then you also try to disengage and downgrade the activity in an overactive muscle. Straight up within like one session, someone's like, "Oh man, my hip feels better. Oh, I can squat a bit better," and you're just like, "Yeah." To a person who's not aware, it feels like magic. You're like, "Oh, what? I didn't have to put up with this bullshit for so long."
Yeah,
it's like, no, you don't actually, but it's not something that you can just know. Like, both you and I have been spending a long time thinking about this problem, working on this problem, solving this problem for grapplers and general humans alike. And I think, until somebody shows you, same thing with jiu-jitsu technique, right? Like you're doing the same pass or the same sweep like for years, and then you meet a world champion or you meet someone who's an expert at that thing and they say, "Hey man, change this detail and do this." And you're like, "God, if only I knew this 5 years ago."
Yeah. How did I not know that?
How did I not know that?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like there's such a world of intricacy and nuance that once you get into it and you start breaking it down and someone actually shows you, hey, you don't have to put up with this back pain. You don't have to have shitty hip flexors to have a good guard. Then you can adopt that new approach and it helps.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I think, what we're doing with the program in terms of just being able to work on hip extension, get people's glutes working and being able to stand straight and then open up those hip flexors is not taking away from people's jiu-jitsu. It's just adding to their day-to-day lives.
Yes, that's right. And I think, people don't realize that they're in pain usually until they're out of it.
Yes.
Right. And then they're like, oh man, like I'm sleeping better, and I actually like feel half decent when I wake up in the mornings after training. And you're like, could you even put a value on that? Like, you know, like feeling like shit every morning, not really sleeping that excellent, to now sleeping a bit better, feeling a bit better every morning. Like, man, that's quite a substantial improvement to the quality of your life.
Oh, massive,
right?
Massive.
And not to mention like your athleticism, you know, your ability to produce force on the mat, even like how you look, because you're standing straighter, your posture's better, you're able to build more muscle because your gym work is more effective. Like there's just so many good things.
It's cumulative.
Yeah.
It builds. And I was having a conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine. I won't name him, but he was saying to me how much...
Name him.
I will not name him. No. Justin. He was saying how he's feeling so strong, like he's been following Bulletproof. But then he recently told me about a spate of injuries. He hurt his neck, he hurt his ankle, hurt his wrist, and he's in pain. And he's like, but people will tell me how strong I am. And I said, bro, if you're in pain, you're not strong. Like we have to address these injuries and concerns, because if you're fragile in different places, pain is literally a neural inhibitor. And people don't realize that. They're like, no, I feel strong. People are telling me I'm moving strong. But actually, we've got to address those pain points for you to really be free to fully express how strong you can be and how athletic you can be.
Can you, what do you mean by neural inhibitor?
So literally when someone is experiencing pain, it blocks their ability to produce force. It's like a natural safety mechanism. The body's like, oh, your knee is sore. It doesn't want you to load it. So I'm talking very unscientific terms about very scientific things.
For you guys, we could go sciencey, but we're keeping it simple for you guys.
Also just because I think if we try and get into really hardcore into like what is pain, I'm going to speak a little bit out of lane.
Yeah.
But I mean, in truth, if you're trying to produce force, and you guys would know it, right? If you've got knee pain, you can barely walk. How are you going to even hop or walk upstairs on that leg, right? In the same way, if you have like acute DOMS, that's when your muscles are growing and the body's saying, hey, take it easy. We're still in the growth phase here. Let us heal. And then as soon as the DOMS is not there, you know, you're ready to go. But in truth, there's all these safety mechanisms in the body that are going to limit you from doing what you want. And if what you want to do is continually break down your body, over time, your body goes, hey, you just got to slow down, tiger. But we put in the drugs, take the anti-inflammatories, take the painkillers, drink the caffeine, do the work. And it's admirable in some ways, but it's also stupid in others. Like
to push through that pain.
To push through that pain. Yeah, and it's just one of those things that the more we do it, we basically just keep doing it until we can't. And then we're talking to a surgeon, and the surgeon goes, right, we've got all these bone fragments, and you're going to be off doing anything for 6 months. And that's when it really hits home. And it's a scary thing. We don't want people to get to that point.
No, we want to avoid that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is our whole message, right? Is that like there's simple things you can do that don't require hours and hours and hours in the gym each week in order for you just to live a better life, avoid big injuries down the track, be more athletic, have a level of physicality that you're proud of and, you know, that is constantly developing. It doesn't take a lot for you to be sort of constantly growing in this, down this path. So I guess one thing I want to mention there when I ask you about the neural piece is that for a lot of people, maybe this analogy or thinking about the hip flexion and guard playing and that kind of thing, it makes sense. So then it's easy to think like, oh, well, I just stretch it and I just like elongate those muscles or those tissues and then I'm good. Stretching is a little bit more to it than that, but in simple terms, when we're talking about mobility and strength and stretching and all this stuff, we're really talking about training the nervous system. And so a lot of the stuff that we use in the program, and if you follow us on Instagram or the YouTube, you'll see we do a lot of mobility work. We use this word mobility a lot. Mobility is a really nice intersection between flexibility and strength.
Yes.
And what it does is it's often stretch type positions where you're adding load and or movement, and that makes it a very active drill or an active position. And what's happening there is that you're educating your nervous system on you being strong in that position that you're in. So you're telling your nervous system, I'm good here, I'm strong. And then in exchange for that, the nervous system says, okay, we can go a little bit deeper then. We can go a little bit deeper. And this is what this journey is.
So I'll dig in on that piece just a fraction when we talk about Golgi tendon bodies. So these are the little bodyguards on how far your muscle can stretch. And if you just stay static, and there's a great value to static stretching, contrary to many people's chat. But the thing is, just pulling on a muscle continually isn't necessarily the best way to achieve improved range. So the Golgi tendon bodies, you do the static stretching, and the Golgi tendon body's like, okay, that's enough. You can only go that far. And then like you're setting a neural limiter. But when you get this contract, relax, muscle goes, okay, I'm contracting, now I'm relaxing. And this is like the basis for like PNF, like you contract the muscle at end range and then it has to relax. Like there's a lot more range there than you just like sitting and reaching for your toes. If you're actually able to engage the hamstring and disengage the hamstring, this actually works within the natural action of the nervous system and the muscle. The muscle's like, oh, a bit of load, like bit of tension, relax, bit of tension, bit of relax. This contract, relax actually serves to not put the Golgi tendon bodies on high alert. So they do actually let you achieve a greater range. And like you were saying, Joe, putting a degree of load at that range gets you stronger through a much broader, like you have much more bandwidth for taking tension.
Right on.
Yeah, so I think definitely that's where mobility is like really a key piece that a lot of people are not doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's not sexy, right? It's not as sexy as like lifting weights.
True.
Or doing chin-ups
it's
or whatever.
It doesn't have the same ego stroke satisfaction of like, yeah, I just did the big thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, that said, like there is like once you start to get the reward centers kicking in your brain for how much better your body feels after, then you do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, once you realize all this other shit that we mentioned before, like it makes you better at everything else. You're like, actually, I want to do this stuff because I am putting on more muscle mass. I am able to do, you know, tougher body weight movements that I couldn't do before. Take the Cossack squat. People fucking love Cossack squats.
Yes, it's a great move.
We post something on our Instagram of us with a barbell on the back doing some Cossack squats. People are like, that's fucking sick.
Yeah.
It's a mobility exercise. It's a weighted stretch. It's like, cool. If you want to, you know, if you want to stretch your ankles out, stretch your inner thigh, get your adductors nice and limber, you can do this too. But it's like, and so I think that's a real, it shows people this is where the flexibility thing crosses into strength.
Yes.
And I think people now are starting to realize, actually, that's beast. I want to be able to do that.
Definitely. And I think it's boost. Yeah, like people always go, oh yeah, people who do yoga are flexible, or ballet, or, you know, dancers. And then people go, oh, people who do powerlifting are strong. It's like, yeah, I mean, all these things are true within like a certain spectrum, and the demanding thing about jiu-jitsu is you've got to be strong and you need to be flexible.
Yeah.
And then also you've got to deal with the day-to-day wear and tear of someone cranking your elbow or cranking your neck. And so I think the other part that we're just kind of on the surface of, but we'll talk about now, is the things that you do off the mat as a remedy for what goes on the mat. So, you know, a lot of people out there, all you hardcore grapplers, whether you like to wrestle or you are a guardero, is the posture. That's kind of the second piece here, is that rounded Mr. Burns jiu-jitsu golem looking.
Shoulders forward,
kyphotic.
Chest caved in.
Yeah. And, you know, as much as this might be functional for staying close, keeping arms in, keeping protected, this can lead to a lot of problems with neck pain, forward head posture. For all of you out there who are doing that desk grind, you're on the computer, you're a knowledge worker, or people at home, yeah, believe that. Just sitting at your desk does something similar, but not with the same amount of load as someone trying to guillotine you or snap you down or anything like that. So, man, a great phrase that I learned from Charles Staley, actually, super nerd of the strength conditioning world. If you don't know who he is, check him out. Charles Staley, very smart guy. He said the best way to counter volume is with load. So if you spend a long time with your head forward and your posture forward, and we consider that to be a great amount of volume, a lot of hours, the best way for us to kind of fix that, because we can't spend as much time back the other way, is to strengthen the offside of that. And the posterior chain, pulling the head back, pulling the shoulders back, scapular retraction, is a lot of stuff that we address in warm-ups as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main kind of goal of the warm-ups in our program, and what we teach in our gym is to get people, is to address these imbalances so that then you can have a higher quality training session. You're not being held back by your rounded shoulders and your flexed upper back. You're not being held back by your tight hip flex. If we can undo that stuff, it allows us to access the body on a greater level. It means that your strength training is going to be better. It means that your jiu-jitsu training is going to be better. So this is the same stuff that we use in our warm-up routines, right?
Yeah.
In the program. And it can seem to folks like this stretch is really hard for me, or this drill's really hard. And it's like, man, it is going to be really hard for a period.
Yes.
If you are stuck in this position and we're doing something that pulls you out of that position, your body's going to fight against it with everything it has.
Yes, that's right.
For a period of time, until you can be consistent enough with it that you convince the nervous system, no, it's important for me to go here.
Yeah,
it grants you access.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, like when we first start jiu-jitsu, it feels awkward and weird, but the level of engagement on a physical and mental level is so high, we get the bug, so we're in. And we will justify absolutely anything to get more of this thing that we love. But the principle for doing mobility and doing all this other work which helps us is the same as jiu-jitsu. Even though it doesn't feel as much fun. We try it, it feels awkward. It's uncomfortable. I don't quite get it. Why should I have this in my life? It will make your life better. I don't want to do it. It's too hard. We sound like every other jiu-jitsu flake of all time. The person who comes to one class, can't quite get on board with the squash and never comes back and misses a lifetime of reward. For those of us who are so heavily invested in jiu-jitsu and want to take the path to black belt or a degree of mastery, what we really need to do, we don't have to accept being in pain, having bad posture, and all these chronic things, which are just accepted terms and conditions of the culture. But we do have to get a little bit uncomfortable in a good way. I think the thing I like that you tend to mention is about the difference between pain and discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, important to know the difference, right? For a lot of people, you ask them how something feels. Let's say we put you into that wall lunge stretch and your hip flexors are on fire and your quads. And I say, how does that feel? And you say, it hurts. A lot of people say that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, well, the one I like to ask a lot is all right, I'm guessing you're familiar with the process of childbirth.
Yeah.
Does it hurt like that does, or does it hurt differently? And it hurts differently. I'm like, would you describe it more as discomfort or a kind of stretch sensation? Yeah, that kind of hits the nail on the head. And you're like, all right, two very different things. Pain, unless you're giving birth or whatever, something very critical that's requiring surgical intervention, pain should be avoided in strength training and in stretching and in jiu-jitsu. Discomfort is not necessarily something to be avoided. That's often a sign that you're kind of playing or working at the perimeter of your abilities,
yes,
and that you're opening up new ground.
Yes.
So it's very important to know that difference, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing I'm always saying is look, if you get acute joint pain, if you're feeling I'm tearing my meniscus or my ligament is, it's usually... The thing is, we feel different when we're doing jiu-jitsu because we're full of adrenaline and our bodies are elastic, and we will take our body to places it probably shouldn't go because all our tissues are basically our internal environment is like a Bikram yoga studio. It's so hot, it's ready to go, we're so elastic.
Without the sexual abuse.
Of course, and also the middle-aged farting. But trust me, you've been at that 6 a.m., postnatal Bikram class, there's lots of farting, I'm just saying.
I'm hoping you guys have not been there.
No, don't go there. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that when we are doing mobility work, we're in the process of warming our bodies. We're in the process. And so there's a point at the start where it's this doesn't feel great until you're warm and you start moving. And once you've done your second set, you've done your third set, it's this is working.
Yeah.
And you just got to get through that initial first bit of discomfort to start to feel that benefit. And by the end of the session, you will feel better.
Yeah.
And we all know that on a subconscious level, but we've got to overcome that immaturity of I don't like it. I don't want to eat my vegetables.
Yeah, we need to stop being fucking lazy.
Pretty much, essentially. And really, when it comes down to it, you can see the difference between people who do it and people who don't.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, people say, and you can feel the difference when you roll with someone.
Yes.
Right? Like when you roll with someone who's mobile and strong, you're like, holy shit, this is a whole different beast.
It's a problem.
Because their body just goes wherever and they're comfortable. Whereas the person who's tight as fuck, maybe they can protect themselves from getting into those positions. But as soon as they get taken out of that spot that they're comfortable in, like those people, say you're mounted and you're setting up like a head arm choke on them.
Yep.
And like, you're like not even halfway into the choke and they're like, stop. Yep. And you're like, I wasn't even choking you yet. And they're like, no, my shoulder hurts.
Yes.
You're like, dude,
yeah,
your shoulder's fucked.
Yes.
Like that's not good. You know?
No. And it's challenging, but the thing I always say is like, if someone's incredibly internally rotated for whatever reason, benching, whatever, they're halfway Kimuru'd. You don't, they're Kimuru'ing themselves through their structural stiffness. And in jiu-jitsu, I believe that like, from what I understand, people who are good at jiu-jitsu usually they have a degree of intellect. You got to study, you got to know jiu-jitsu. And there's almost like a kind of intellectual superiority, like, oh, we're smart. We know jiu-jitsu. We're not meatheads like those damn strikers.
Yeah.
The stupid
MMA guys.
God, they're meatheads. But the truth is, the MMA guys put in a lot of work to be as complete as they can be athletically. While we're just sitting in our little castles of insecurity around jiu-jitsu, like, oh, we're smarter, but we don't stretch. We don't lift weights. It feels like 1962 boxing. Like it just feels like, oh, weights is cheating. No, it's not. If you look at the absolute elite level guys in the world, not only are they lifting, they're supplementing. They're doing everything they can to have the athletic advantages. It's within your control to look after yourself and to improve the way your body moves. And really, we're just trying to make it accessible.
That's right.
That's what it comes down to.
Man, we didn't get into our third point, but we're going to have to continue this episode next time anyways.
Definitely.
I think that's we give people a tiny little piece on how the mobility piece works and the two main issues.
Yes.
The tight hip flexors and the rounded upper posture. We didn't get into the elbows and knees, but let's hit that next episode. And I guess we can also give maybe people some practical takeaways for how they can address the hips and the upper spine.
Definitely. Well, I think that, like you mentioned at the start, getting into that kneeling wall stretch is like number one. If you're a grappler, it doesn't matter whether you like the top game or bottom game, that's number one. And then the next bit on that isn't just stretching the muscles. We've got to reinforce and provide a bit of re-education for the nervous system. So we've got to get our glutes working, doing things like a fire hydrant, a single leg deadlift, doing things which are going to create a certain amount of tension and force you to use your glute to stabilize your hip. Super important to get the posterior chain working. And then when we're talking about the shoulders, like doing the scorpion stretch, opening up through there, tabletop press.
Tabletop.
Man.
Passive hang.
Passive hang, great move. We don't hang enough. And that's so good for the wrists and elbows. But then being able to get our shoulders back and doing our side-lying rotation, that is actually, engaging all through the back of the scap. And then scap push-ups. It's funny to me how much people suck at it.
Yeah.
And it's so good for teaching people to retract through their shoulder blades to get that back area working, that back piece. So that's the combos I like to hit.
Yeah, exactly the same. And they're really simple drills. You can teach them to anyone. You can teach them to your mum. You can teach them to your fucking, to your coach. But they will produce results for you until the end of time. You can find them all pretty much on our Instagram. They're all there. Yes. If you're not on the program, they're also all through our program. But simple things done on a consistent basis produce the results.
Indeed, you got to do the work.
Got to do the work.
My man.
Thank you, my bro.
Thank you for tuning in, all of you out there.
Cheers, guys.
Podcast land, and we will see you next time.